Hi, it's Miss Esquivel, and today we're going to talk about what do scientists do. So by the end of this, you should be able to describe what a scientist is and identify the different tools that they use, as well as know some questions that they might ask when they're doing science experiments. So let's start with the basics. So what do we think a scientist is? A scientist is someone who studies or is an expert of a certain type of science. You could even be a scientist, right? Because you conduct experiments, right? And you study different types of sciences, right? So even you could be a scientist. Scientists also do this little thing called inquiry. So, what inquiry means is that they ask questions and they find us the solution or answer to it. So, that's inquiry, asking questions and finding the answer to it. So, let's start. So, this scientist is an astronomer. So, this is one of the different types of scientists that we might see. And he is curious about space. So, he studies planets, stars, and galaxies. And what kind of tool do you think this is? The telescope. That's the kind of tool that a scientist might use. Remember when we talked about all the tools that we might use in our classroom to do experiments and stuff? Well, this is his tool that he uses for his experiments. And what kind of questions do you think he could ask? Because there's no such thing as a silly question. They could wonder anything, right? So, one of the questions he could ask is how far one planet is from another, or how far this star is from this star. Let's see, this is a botanist. So, a botanist studies plants. So, she is curious about how plants grow. So, what kind of questions could this scientist ask? She could wonder how we can make plants grow on space, right? Well, we know she knows that we need soil and we need water. So she could try to figure out how we can make that possible on space. And what kind of tools do you think she could use? I mean, really, any. Well, what do you see her using? We see goggles, right? And we see a lab coat. We see little tubes here. So she uses a lot of different tools that even we use in our classroom. And then these scientists are archaeologists. So they're curious about animals and people that lived in the past. Now, what kind of questions do you think these scientists could ask? Well, if they're curious about people in the past, we could talk about mummies. So they could ask questions about different mummies that they find, like how old was this mummy when they died, or how long ago was this mummy buried here? And so they use tools like they use goggles too because they're digging around in dirt all the time, and they could use gloves to keep their hands clean. They use a little brush to dust off all the dirt from different fossils or findings that they might find. This is a geographer. So he is curious about maps and Earth's environment. So they kind of explore the Earth to be able to make maps and stuff like that. So, what questions do you think this scientist could ask? And what kind of tools do you think they could use? Tools, it could be as simple as a pencil, right? Because they need to write down notes, right? They use so many different types of tools. And this one is an oceanographer, and she is curious about the ocean. So that can mean marine life in the ocean, that can mean about the water itself. So she could ask different questions, like if she found a new animal, she could ask, how long can this animal live for? Or what does this animal even eat? And what tools do you think she'll use? Right? She could use a microscope because she could put the liquid on a little plate and explore from there. So, what I want y'all to do is to So, after we've gone over all the different types of scientists and different tools they might use or questions that they might ask, what I want you to do is to draw yourself as a scientist using some of these tools. And I also want you to ask a question that you might ask when you're doing this science experiment in your drawing. So, for instance, you could draw yourself carving or digging up dinosaur bones, right? And so you're going to use the tools that an archaeologist would use, like a magnifying glass and goggles and a brush to dust off the dirt from the bones. And your question could be, I wonder how old this dinosaur was when he died, or I wonder how long ago these bones were buried here. You could ask questions like that. And then I want you to take a picture of your drawing and submit it below.